This is section 8, lecture 1. In this section we're going to be talking about national security policy, and I've broken it up into several lectures. In this first lecture we're going to be talking about some theoretical points, and then take you back to a little bit back to the first lecture discussing America's place in the world, to help explain our national security posture. Any nation state, including the United States, has a defense policy. Now, some of them are very complex, in-depth, expensive, and large, like the United States, and some of them are relatively very small and weak. But all nation states have this in common. They all are concerned about defending their borders, defending their people. And any number of factors goes into developing a nation state's national security policy. It's not just the military. That is the key point of it, and of course what we think about first when we think about national security policy. What is the strength of our armed forces? What is their technological level of advancement? What is their effectiveness, not just to protect the territory of the United States, but also to project our power around the world? But there are also other areas that are influential on defense policy. Our economic state is also very influential on national security policy, primarily because it goes into building our military, advancing the technology, and paying for that support. And so a nation state's economy has to be viable, and it has to be strong in order for its national security policy to be strong. And so if we talk about the economic aspects of national security policy, does the country put productive use of natural and human resources to work where they should be in an effective way? Do they have the financial assets? Do they have the money necessary to pay for technological advancements, necessary to pay for weaponry, necessary to pay for troops? All of these things are very important to our national security policy underlying our military strength. There's also a political element to national security policy as well. I have here, this measures the stability and legitimacy of a government and its institutions. One of the things that is interesting when you study conflict, when you study either international war or civil wars, is this stability versus instability of the nation state in question. If a nation state is stable, if its institutions are strong, it faces less of a potential for civil war. And that's very important. But if the institutions are weak and the government is not stable, not only does it face a higher probability of civil war, but it would face a higher probability of international conflict as well, because other nation states may seek to project their power or project their influence over that weak country, over that unstable country. And they may get support from the citizens of that country because their citizens view the legitimacy of the government in an unfavorable light. So having political stability is very important to a nation state being able to defend itself. And it goes along with this next point a societal aspect of national security policy. Is there a valid civil society? Are there active interest groups? Is the media free? All of those points go into the political aspect of the citizens having a legitimacy of their governing institutions and seeing a legitimacy in their leaders. In nation states that don't have citizen involvement, that limit freedoms such as interest groups, that limit freedoms such as media, there's going to build oftentimes a lot of resentment against the government and its institutions. And so the stability of that nation state would be undermined. And just as we've said, if the stability of the political institutions is undermined, then its national defense may be undermined as well. Finally, we have here an environmental aspect to national security policy. And this is the degree to which natural resources are protected and human activities are environmentally sustainable. This too has a societal and political and economic explanation. And all of these factors really go together, building on one another. But if we look at this environmental factor on its own, we can ask these questions. How is a society and how are the people of those society going to react when they run out of natural resources, when they aren't able to support and sustain themselves, they aren't able to feed themselves, they don't have access to clean water, so on and so forth? Well, that ripple effect is going to cause societal problems, political problems, economic problems, all of which would cause problems for military strategy. And so if we have one example just sort of pulled from the air, let's say there are mass people in a nation state that doesn't have enough water. Maybe they're going through a drought, and thus they're going through the inability to feed themselves because with the drought, there's not a viable agricultural ability either. What are they going to do? Maybe they migrate, which causes strain. Maybe they begin to pressure their neighboring nation states, which may lead to international conflict. Maybe their neighboring nation states do have viable resources. Maybe they do have access to clean water and an arable land. Well, all these may be leading to the potential of conflict or fighting over those resources. And so while we may not think of these other factors first when we talk about national security policy, we can see how economic policy and a stable political environment and a supportive society and environmental stability all may factor into a nation state's national security policy. One of the other theoretical factors that we need to look at is where a nation state finds itself in the world. We discussed this in the first series of lectures, and we said that the United States is in this place of primacy or hegemony in the world. And this creates a global environment that we find ourselves in, including our strategic environment. With this place of primacy, perhaps the threats to our country may be weaker relatively if we remember back to the balance of power theories and power preponderance theories, that rational nation states would not seek to challenge us, recognizing that they can't win. But we also discussed in those early lectures that there are challenges to U.S. dominance. And this creates this strategic environment which our national security policy has to be developed. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are the main global threats? What are the relative powers of other nation states versus ours? What are the regional balances of power and perceived threats? All of these things factor into the strategic environment that we find ourselves in. Today we can say that the relative global balance of power and the regional balance of power favors the United States. The perceived threat is the rise of China, and so that formulates elements of our strategic thought. One of the desires of the Obama administration was to focus on Asia away from the Middle East. Well, we could say in part that may have been to address this rising nature of China. We also have to look at other global threats. And of course, currently facing terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS are among the major elements of the strategic environment that we find ourselves in. We're going to discuss terrorism in a subsequent lecture. What else goes into how we view our place in the world strategically? Our assets. Whether or not a nation state can protect and defend itself has to do with its physical and natural resources. And the United States is in a very unique position. If we talk about geography, particularly, we're bordered by 2 oceans, which keeps attacks from nation states at bay. And we have friendly relations with our 2 other neighbors. Our relative size is also important. Because we are a large country, we couldn't be easily invaded. Our natural resources are enough for us to support ourselves as well. Our strategic culture also influences how policymakers view our national security policy. And these are things that we have discussed in part before as well. What are the widely shared normative beliefs of policymakers in the United States? Well, we discussed earlier, due to this place of hegemony or primacy, that many believe in an aspect of American exceptionalism, and that attitude influences how we view our national security position and what our policymakers believe we should do in the world using our military power. State-society relations, the interactions between government and private actors, are also elements of strategic thought. How can the government use the public? How can they use the media? How can they use then businesses in a favorable way to support their foreign policy goals, including their national security goals? Are companies like Apple or Microsoft or others, Google, going to be cooperative in sharing information about potential threats to the United States, or are they not? That's an element of state-society relations. Structural arrangements, our governing institutions, shared powers, and separation of powers have to be discussed within the context of national security policy, because when there are divided governments, then there's going to be a limitation on what the president can do versus what Congress wants to do and wants to pay for. And so if you remember our discussions from the presidential chapter and the congressional chapter, those differences in politics and those differences in powers either enhances or limits our abilities in our national security policy. And so in any number of ways, we see these theoretical aspects as being influential on how we may be able to formulate our national security policies and carry them out. So if we think about all of those things together, we can view America's place in the world given those points. And once again, I don't want to go into this too deeply because we covered it in the first chapter. The United States is by far the largest military actor in the world. When it comes to spending, we see that in the first column here. When it comes to the total number of active personnel, we are in second place versus China. But our spending is so much greater and our technological advancement is so much greater that number of personnel is kind of a wash. We have as many military aircraft as the next 10 countries do. We have a large number of naval ships. We see there that China has more naval ships. But if we balance those against what we have, the technological advancement is much greater. For instance, China, in the past couple of years, has only gotten its first aircraft carrier, whereas the U.S. Navy has several. Our land-based weapons systems are great. This includes our nuclear arsenal primarily, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. We see there that our main competitor is Russia, and that's been the history of the nuclear environment throughout the Cold War. We're going to discuss our nuclear policy in a subsequent lecture in this section. And so once again, we see then a different way to view our strategic environment and our assets. While China has a larger number of standing personnel, the United States has a vastly larger number of personnel versus other nation states when it comes to geographic distribution of them around the world. And so while China has a larger number of standing military, they don't have bases in Japan, they don't have bases in Germany, so on and so forth. Whereas the United States not only has this large number of active duty U.S. military, we also have them positioned, as well as our Navy and Air Force, so on and so forth, around the world where we can be more effective and active when necessary. And so we see then this place of the United States in military primacy as influential on our strategic culture and our strategic environment, what we find ourselves in. And throughout the next lectures, we're going to be discussing more specific elements of our national security policies.